something is starting to quietly build around the Philadelphia Eagles. And if you've been paying close attention to what's happening behind the scenes, you can feel that this isn't just another routine lead up to the NFL draft. There's tension, there's opportunity, and there are multiple moving pieces that could collide in a way that reshapes not only the Eagles' strategy, but potentially the entire NFC landscape. Let's start with one of the biggest storylines developing right now across the league, because it could have a ripple effect that directly impacts Philadelphia. The situation involving Dexter Lawrence and the New York Giants is escalating fast. What initially looked like standard contract negotiations has now reportedly gone far beyond that point. Talks haven't just stalled, they've completely broken off. And when you hear that a team has already started engaging with others about a potential trade, that tells you this is real, and it's heading toward a resolution sooner rather than later. Now think about what that means from an Eagles perspective. This is a player Philadelphia knows very well. They faced him twice a year, and he's been a consistent problem in the trenches. There's a reason even a veteran like Jason Kelce openly talked about how difficult it was to deal with Lawrence's size, strength, and physicality. This isn't just another defensive tackle. At his peak, he's been one of the most dominant nose tackles in football. But here's where things get interesting. Despite that reputation, there are signs that concern teams around the league. His recent production has trended downward, and he's coming off what's being described as a career-worst season. At the same time, he's looking for a significant pay raise, especially after seeing other players at his position cash in with deals around $26 million per year while he's making less. That combination, declining numbers and increasing demands, is exactly the kind of situation that makes front offices hesitate. And yet, despite those red flags, there's still significant interest around the league. Why? Because this draft class isn't particularly deep at defensive tackle. That scarcity could push a team to take a gamble, to make a splash move, and to believe they can get elite production out of Lawrence again. All it takes is one team to believe he's still that guy. Now shift the focus back to Philadelphia. Should the Eagles even consider getting involved? Based on everything we know, it doesn't really make sense. This is already one of the strongest defensive tackle groups in the NFL. Investing major assets into a player with question marks doesn't align with how this front office typically operates. But even if they're not directly involved, the consequences of a deal like this could still benefit them. A trade involving a player of that caliber could trigger movement across the draft board. And when chaos starts early in the first round, that's when opportunities open up. Because here's the other key piece of this puzzle. There's a growing belief around the league that the 2026 NFL draft could be one of the most trade-heavy drafts in recent memory. Multiple teams are expected to be aggressive, especially in the first half of round one. The strength of this class lies heavily on the defensive side of the ball, edge rushers, corners, linebackers, while the overall depth, particularly in later rounds, is lacking. That imbalance is pushing teams to rethink how they approach their picks. And that brings us directly to Howie Roseman. If there's one thing you can count on, it's that he's always ready to make a move if the situation is right. He's already made it clear that trading up is absolutely on the table. Not a guarantee, but an option. And with the Eagles holding solid draft capital in rounds 2 and 3, they're in a position to be flexible. Now imagine this scenario. Teams at the top start making moves. Maybe the Cowboys, sitting with multiple first-round picks, decide to jump up for a player they covet, possibly even targeting someone the Giants also want. Suddenly there's pressure. Picks start flying. Players begin to slide. And that's when a front office like Philadelphia's steps in, identifies value, and makes a calculated move up the board. There are already names being discussed internally as potential trade-up targets. Players who could immediately contribute and fill key roles, particularly along the offensive line or at positions with long-term importance. Some are more polished, others have high upside, but the common theme is clear. If the right player starts to fall into a reachable range, the Eagles could strike. But just when you think that's the biggest storyline, there's another layer that makes this situation even more fascinating and potentially more volatile. The wide receiver room, because while publicly the stance remains the same, that the team does not want to trade A.J. Brown, there are strong indications that something more complicated is happening behind closed doors. There's a belief that A.J. Brown may have quietly requested a trade, with his agent exploring interest from other teams. And when you connect the dots, it starts to make sense.
This is about talent. Everyone knows what A.J. Brown is. This is about role, production and long-term legacy. On a roster loaded with offensive weapons DeVonta Smith, Saquon Barkley, Dallas Goedert and additional receiving options. There simply aren't enough opportunities to go around at the volume a player like Brown might want. And in today's NFL, individual numbers matter, especially when it comes to build a Hall of Fame resume. So now the Eagles find themselves in a very delicate position. If they keep A.J. Brown, they maintain one of the most dangerous offenses in football. If they move him, they need to be confident that the depth they've built at wide receiver can collectively replace that production, and still keep the team in championship contention. And here's the key takeaway, Howie Roseman appears to be preparing for both scenarios. Veteran J. Brown styles or goals. The roster is being constructed in a way that keeps the Eagles competitive at the highest level. That's not accidental. That's calculated. So now everything starts to come together. A potential blockbuster trade elsewhere in the division. A draft expected to be filled with aggressive moves. A front office ready to strike if the opportunity presents itself. And a major question mark surrounding one of the team's biggest stars. All of this is happening at the same team, and it is building towards something that could define the Eagles' direction heading into the season. The real question is, if the right player starts to fall on draft night and the price is right, do you trust Howie Roseman to make that aggressive move, even if it means reshaping the roster in a major way? What do you think the Eagles should do? And this is where everything gets up. Because once you accept that the Eagles are preparing for multiple outcomes at the same team, you start to see how interconnected all of these decisions really are. This isn't just about one trade, one player, or one draft pick. It is about flexibility, leverage, and timing. If the board begins to shift the way many around the league spec, Philadelphia could find itself in a very aggressive position without forcing anything. That's the key difference. They don't need to move up, but they are ready if the right opportunity presents itself. And historically, that's when Howie Roseman has done some of his best work. He doesn't chase chaos, he waits for it, and then recapitalizes. Now think about the scenario where a run on defensive players happens early, just like league insiders are predicting. Edge rushers, corners, linebackers flying off the board. That naturally pushes offensive talent down. And if a premium offensive lineman or a versatile piece starts slipping into that range dash outside the top 15, that's when things get very real for the Eagles sitting at pick 23. Because now the conversation inside that war room changes from should we move up to can we afford not to, and if you connect that to the wide receiver situation, it becomes even more strategic. If there's even a possibility that A.J. Brown is not part of the long-term picture, then adding offensive talent, veterans protection up front or another dynamic weapon becomes more urgent. Not desperate but intentional. At the same time, the Eagles have already positioned themselves to absorb that kind of loss if it happens. The additions and depth at wide receiver weren't random moves. They were insurance. They were preparation. And more importantly, they give the front office options. Because let's be clear, trading A.J. Brown is not simple. It is not just about finding a team willing to meet the asking price. It is about navigating cap implications, timing the move correctly, and ensuring that the return actually improves the team both now and in the future. That's a narrow path to walk. But if a team gets aggressive, especially in a draft environment where movement is expected, and offers the kind of package that aligns with what the Eagles want, then suddenly this becomes a real conversation. Not speculation, not rumor, but a calculated decision. And here is where it all connects back to draft night. Imagine a situation where multiple trades have already shaken up the top of the board. A team jumps ahead of Dallas. Another slides back to accumulate picks. A player the Eagles have graded extremely high is unexpected or still available. At the same time, calls are coming in not just about moving up, but potentially about players on the roster. That's the kind of moment where everything converges. Do you package picks to go get your guy? Do you stay pattying and let the board come to you? Or do you make a bigger move that changes the structure of your offense entirely? Those are real decisions that could be sitting in front of this front office very soon. And what makes this even more fascinating is that the Eagles are not operating from a position of weakness. This is a roster built to compete right now. That gives them the freedom to think long-term without sacrificing the present. Not every team has that luxury. Philadelphia does. So every move, or even the decision not to move, is going to be intentional. If they trade up, it's because they believe that player is a cornerstone piece. If they stay put, it's because the value lines up exactly where they are. If they make a bigger, more unexpected move involving a veteran player, it's because they've already mapped out how to replace that production. Nothing about this will be reactive, and that's why this draft more than most feels like a turning point. Not because the Eagles have to make a move, but because they're in position to control how aggressive they want to be. So as all of these builds toward draft night, you have to ask yourself, are the Eagles about to make a calculated move that keeps them in championship contention? Or is there a bigger shake-up coming that nobody fully says yet? Because once you start looking at it from that angle, it becomes clear that this is not about reacting to the board anymore. It's about controlling the outcome before the board even settles. The Eagles have put themselves in a position where they can dictate terms if they choose to, and that's a dangerous place for the rest of the league. If a team like Dallas makes the aggressive jump everyone is watching for, that could trigger a chain reaction. Another team might panic and move up. Someone else could slide back to recover value. And in the middle of that storm, Philadelphia is sitting there with flexibility, depth, and dash enough capital to strike without crippling their future. And here is the part that should be overlooked. The Eagles don't need a perfect draft to remain contenders. That changes how you approach everything. You're not drafting out of desperation. You're drafting to elevate, to reinforce, to stay ahead of teams that are trying to catch you. So if Howie Roseman says a player, someone they've graded as a top-tier impact piece, start to fall into a realistic hand. Don't be surprised if the move